I'm Barbara Haskell. I'm a curator at the Whitney and the curator of At the Dawn of a New Age. So this is a show that surveys the first American avant-garde. It's drawn mainly from the Whitney Permanent Collection. It includes 60 works by 48 artists. 19% of them are new to the collection, and of the remainder, 45% have been in storage for between 30 and 50 years. So bringing them together allows us to tell a much different story of American art that has been told before, one that's more expansive and shows the tremendous range of work that was being done in the century in response to the changes that were happening in the world. So turn of the century America was a time of tumultuous change, economic, social, cultural. There was women's suffragette, Einstein's theory of relativity, Freud's theory of the unconscious, and it seemed that the world was just at the verge of something new. And the artists in this show reflect that enthusiasm, this ebullience about the feeling that anything was possible to the human spirit, that there was a sense of a new beginning that you really see in these vibrant colors and sense just total freedom that the artists felt in these early years. So Pelton was one of a number of artists who responded to the mechanization, industrialization of the modern era and saw it as bringing about fragmentation and isolation. And in response, she turned to more spiritual concerns. So she studied Theosophy, she studied Zen Buddhism, tracts of ancient texts to develop a spiritual understanding that she had of the world, independent of organized religion, but one that allowed her to sense this divinity that she felt existed in nature. So this is a picture that does exactly that. Here's this white swan, which she identifies as an almost self-portrait, traveling on this red river up into this kind of illuminating world of spiritual enlightenment. Charles Shaw was one of what was called the Park Avenue Cubists because he was from a wealthy family, from the Woolworth fortune. And this is a picture that shows his assimilation of Cubism. So Cubism had to do with this fracturing of form dividing form into these sort of geometric fragments. So he's creating a self-portrait out of these fragments with the result that it has this sort of sense of rhythm across the picture, this vibrating quality of form and color to give a kind of vibrancy to the surface of the picture. Specific to what the show presents is that the work was specifically American. He talked about all of his work being solely of America. So this portrait is indicative. It's a very American image of a man in the 1920s. And unlike what was happening in Europe, where there were camps and the artists really remained very competitive with one another, the Americans were able to pick and choose so that a work like this combines the fragmentation of form that was typical of Cubism, but unites it with the Fauvism colors that really gives this vibrancy to a picture unlike anything that would have been done in Europe. So I mentioned that a number of the works in the exhibition are new acquisitions. Aaron Douglas is in that category. Douglas was one of the leading artists of the Harlem Renaissance, this time in the 1920s when writers and musicians and artists came together in Harlem to present a new vision of the African American, to break the stereotypes that existed before. Douglas came in 1925. He came from Kansas, and almost immediately became one of the dominant graphic artists of the Harlem Renaissance. And this is a work that was commissioned in 1925 for an article in Theater Arts on the play Emperor Jones, which was the first play that opened on Broadway, Eugene O'Neill's play. It was the first play that had a leading, African-American in a leading role. So these are three images of parts of that play. It tells the story of Emperor Jones. And what's fascinating about the work is that it describes Douglas's style. So early on, he developed this style of silhouetted forms, very bold, taking from European modernism, but also combining it with African heritage. So you see a lot of references to Egyptian wall painting, for example, the silhouetted forms, the forms in profile, this very bold abstract style. This explosion of new energy and new creativity was happening not just on the East Coast, but on the West Coast and in Chicago. Young G is an artist who came to San Francisco as a 16-year-old. His father had been a merchant in San Francisco and had claimed citizenship by claiming that his birth certificate had been burned in the 1906 earthquake and fire. His mother was not able to join him because at that point America was denying access to Chinese women, afraid that they would give birth in America. So G came to San Francisco already as an American citizen. Using these kind of almost flat planes of color, he created this very rhythmic surface across the picture. He was Chinese in a country that was at that point very anti-Asian. He balanced these two very conflicting identities that he had, on one hand being Chinese, on the other being an American citizen living in an industrial world. One time he was asked, why don't you paint in a Chinese traditional manner? And he said, because I live in a modern industrial society. But at the same time, although he adopted a Western vocabulary, he painted Chinese subjects. So this is a picture of Chinatown. So Albert Bloch was born in St. Louis. He started his work as an illustrator for a satirical magazine in St. Louis, The Mirror. And the editor sent him to Munich, which is the center of illustrated magazines. He was identified by Wassily Kandinsky and Franz Marc, who saw in his work a similar kind of spiritual inclination that they were beginning to develop in their own work. They began to form what became known as the Blue Rider, this group of German, Russian, and American artists that used the forms of Cubism and Fauvism to create more spiritual kinds of explorations and understanding of the world. This is a fabulous example of the kind of ebullience and effusion and sense of possibility and hope that characterizes a lot of the work in this exhibition, that it's filled with these vibrant kinds of colors, this lone figure walking up a mountain to the top where there's a cathedral. So this notion of the ultimate triumph of the spiritual in the world is very much embodied in this painting. So all the works on this wall are artists who look to nature as springboards for spiritual transcendence, spiritual understanding. So Charles Birchfield was from Cleveland. His father died when he was 4, and the family was left without any money, and the mother was going to separate the children, divide them up among different relatives. That didn't happen, but Birchfield grew up with a kind of sense of fear of the fragmentation and loss. And as a child, he turned to nature as a refuge. In 1960, between 16 and 18, he began to look back on his childhood memories. He made 400 watercolors during that period. This is a perfect example, this flame that comes up that really is about spiritual illumination, the sense that he felt in nature that he was in contact with the divinity, that he talked about I and my God are merged together. So Florine Stettheimer was from a matriarchal family. She was born in Buffalo. Her father deserted the family when she was very young, and the mother took the girls to Europe. World War I brought the family back to New York, where they created a salon. So it's dominated by the mother and three unmarried sisters. They would invite all the leading artists and writers of the day that would come to their Saturday soirees. Florine Stettheimer creates these magical environments out of very confectionery color. So this is a painting that in a sense is a self-portrait. She identified herself with flowers. So here you have all of these flowers coming out of this vase, which has her name on it, the sun coming down, the birds flying. So it's a picture of sort of this joyous celebration of a birthday. This is a work that very much suggests the fantasy world of the Roaring Twenties, the sense of imaginary wealth and glamour that dominated that period. So Oskar Blumner was born in Germany, came to America as a 25-year-old architect, but very soon turned to fine art. So Blumner synthesized aspects of styles that were happening in Europe that were separate. He was able to bring them together. So the flat planes that they're typical of Cubism, he was able to unite them with these bold Fauves colors. In the show, over and over again, you see Americans being able to combine different styles to create a totally sort of American-born modernism. Oskar Blumner had his exhibition in 1915. He presented these works that were among the boldest, most advanced works being done in America. But the critics interpreted them only through the biography of Oskar Blumner, the fact that he was German. They saw the work as malevolent and evil, alien to everything that represented American democracy. This painting that really is describing a landscape in New Jersey was considered somehow alien to America. So nothing sold. So Pamela Colman Smith was born in London of American parents. She went from London to New York to Jamaica, where she spent a great deal of time. Beginning in the late 19th, early 20th century, she began to do symbolist works on paper. She talked about the fact that she listened to music when she did them. This is a work that came out of listening to a Beethoven sonata. And by listening to music, she was able to unleash and tap into her unconscious. So this is a picture of women coming out of the ocean and in mourning. So you can see these women that are hiding their faces in some kind of image of mourning and loss and grief, but they also are identified with the wave. So this merging of this anthropomorphizing of nature is something that Smith does again and again, this sense of the female identified with nature. So around 1901, she was introduced to a secret society called the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, with Kabbalah, tarot cards, Egyptian texts for some sense of spiritual enlightenment. So this is a set of vintage tarot cards Pamela Colman Smith was commissioned to design in 1909. They radically changed the way tarot cards were printed, not only in the ordering of the cards, but also Pamela Colman Smith illustrated every single card. Before that, the minor arcana had been illustrated only with symbols. But in her case, she created images for every card. They're very similar to the works that she was doing in fine arts, much more influence of the English pre-Raphaelites. You can see this kind of symbolism that she taps into and creates these cards that are filled with color, and they have remained the most popular cards in existence today. So this is a work that will surprise people because it's by the poet E.E. Cummings. Through his Harvard connections, he began doing line drawings for The Dial, which was a literary magazine. But all along, he really saw painting and poetry as dual obsessions, he called them. So he wrote poetry at night and painted during the day. And his ambition was to be a modernist in both fields. He began doing paintings like this. They were called noise and sound paintings. So his ambition was to create visual images of the cacophony of New York, the sights and the sounds and the whirling bodies that were part of the New York metropolitan experience. So here's a painting that uses these swirling forms, eyes and cones to create this very exciting image, an analogy to what the noise of the city was to Cummings. So Dawn of a New Age runs at the Whitney through February 2023. I welcome you all to come to the Whitney and see the excitement and ebullience that these artists expressed in their canvases.